is Rock and Roll Grad School with your hosts, Heidi Hedquist and Luke Poling. Yankee Hotel Podcast.
Hello, kitties. I'm just going to leave
We're
it.
not going to have a good time.
We are going to have a good time.
Oh.
Unfortunately, this is one of these interviews that, due to circumstances beyond our control, you were not able to participate in.
Yes.
And I'm not just saying this because you were here, but I feel like you would have brought a lot to the table for the conversation.
Wow, that never happens.
I know. And I won't say that often, but
but thank God you did for once.
Yes, exactly. But we are talking with Michael Lockwood from Lions and Ghosts, which was a band that I feel like I had heard the name.
Mm-hmm.
A mid-'80s pop rock band from Southern California. And as soon as I heard the first single, the first track on the record, it was just sort of like, I would have loved this band in high school.
Uh-huh.
But they are back together. There's new music. We are talking about the reissue of their first record, which is a great chance to get to a bunch of stuff. And I think do you listen to the shows if you're not on them?
I do.
Okay. I think you will enjoy this one.
Well, good.
Yes.
Yes, I do listen to them.
Now,
I like to know what I missed.
Right. Make sure I don't say anything about you.
Right.
What was the thing you sent me that we were going to discuss?
There are so many things we've been
meaning
to discuss.
I think this one was about the connection between Cameron Crowe and, is it BB Buell?
Oh, yeah. I just discovered that today, thanks to BB's Instagram.
Do you know what magazine this is?
It said in her post. I can't remember. But how I didn't know this, because A, I read her book. B, obviously I'm a mega fan of the film.
Right.
And
should we explain what the hell we're talking about?
Yeah, probably a good idea. And the fact that not only, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No,
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, just to explain what we're talking about.
Yes.
This article in magazine TBD is about BB's connection with Cameron Crowe in the 70s, which, if he was the William Miller, which we had to look up earlier to find out the name
his
of his
last
character.
name. Yes.
If he was the William Miller, that she is sort of the Penny Lane.
Well, and there's an article that was in Talk magazine.
Okay.
That says as much, because it's an interview with them several years ago. Yes. Yeah, that's why I sent you all 4 of those pictures, because if you zoom in, you can read the article. And it literally says as much. And then Jason Lee's character, whose name was Jeff Beebe in the movie.
He was the lead singer of Stillwater.
Yes. Is named after her. And there's these pictures of them, like the real Cameron Crowe,
right,
and real Beebe when they were there. And like he's got these Post-its, and there's one where it says, this photo was taped to my wall while writing Almost Famous. Beebe's pure joy was infectious to everyone around her. And it talks about like how she was just like Penny Lane. Every time she walked in a room, she lit up the room just by entering. Like there's this whole it is very clearly that she was the inspiration.
That's fascinating. Fascinating that we didn't know this. Fascinating that probably a lot of people are screaming at their phone right now saying, "You idiots."
I know.
All sorts of fascination.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's fascinating.
It is. Well, that's lovely. And I feel like I need to watch the movie again.
You really haven't watched it recently? I watch it like every day.
I haven't.
I watch it so often. It's ridiculous.
Yet
I still forgot William Miller's name.
Right. Well, what is it about the film for you? I mean, obviously the storyline. Is there some sort of Billy Crudup fantasy that has yet to be?
I mean, he is pretty smoking hot in that movie.
Right. Yes.
But
is it just the era? Is it
it's
the music
the mood.
Of Stillwater? Okay.
I mean, straight out of Troy, Michigan. That is truly my hometown.
Right.
Troy, Michigan, class of 93.
Yeah, I need to get you a Fever Dog shirt or something.
Oh my God, I totally need a Fever Dog shirt. I need the shirt where it's like Russell in the front and blurry. Oh, I would wear it everywhere.
That is
That shirt has to be available.
It should be. If it's not,
We need to
Etsy.
make it.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Uh,
I think the script is so good in that film. There's so many great lines.
True.
And I do still think I would be Russell and you would be William.
That sounds about right.
Hmm.
What goes through your mind now when you hear this first uh, Lions and Ghosts record?
Um, well, it's funny. I listened to it a few months ago. Yeah, 2 or 3 months ago. I, pulled out the vinyl and dusted that off and put that on and started thinking about it and wondered, how relevant is the production value? How's the songwriting holding up? And I don't just do that with, Lions and Ghosts or something that I've worked on. I do that with everything all the time. Like a lot of people do. It's like you put on a Zeppelin record and you go, yeah, it's timeless. It still holds up today. So that's something that goes through my mind because I'm so fascinated by production and everything. And in listening to that first Lions and Ghosts record, I went, we have to make this happen because it's a shame that it's not streaming on any of the services. And I felt like, it's still a great sounding record, and the songs are solid songs, and it's a fun project. And I just felt like, we need to make this happen again. So in listening back to it, I'm still very proud of it. It brings back more fond memories now than some of those other memories that,
Okay.
happen when you're 24 years old and you're all vying for whatever position you feel you must have. But
Right.
yeah, I feel good about what we've done, and I'm happy to put that back out in the world for more people to hear.
It seems like it's been a lifetime of production work that you've done since then. You happy with the way the guitar sounds, the way everything else sounds? Or does it just feel like a completely different person at this point?
It feels like a completely different person. That's a great question, actually. It's when I listen to that, I think, oh, that's definitely me playing guitar, but I hear places that were just budding then that probably I've explored a lot more over the years. And
Hmm.
so it it is interesting. Sometimes I have to think about it. I'm like, wait, I pretty much did all the guitars, so that isn't someone else, because some things don't sound like me in retrospect. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's interesting to go back and hear those early sort of orchestrations and productions of pieces.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree with you. It does sound timeless. I know in one interview you sort of referred to Lions and Ghosts as the big star of that era, that you guys, which I understand why you're hanging your head. It's just like,
Yeah,
oh,
I
I
know.
did not make the allusion to us and Big Star.
Yeah, I know. And thank you for noticing, because when I wrote that, I went, it's fair in my mind to say something like that because I was a late bloomer to Big Star, and they greatly influenced me in the songwriting and guitar parts and production and things. But, I didn't discover Big Star until some point in the 80s, long,
Hmm.
long after that. And what was at some point much later than that, I finally heard the first Chris Bell record that had never come out. So I I didn't really want to make that comparison, but I do feel like there's a portion of that there's truth in that we made a great record amongst many, 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 many signings that were happening in Hollywood in the 80s. And it was just a frenzy. It was LA's time again, like it
Right.
was for Seattle or New York or San Francisco. So I really feel like we made a great record and then we made bad choices. And maybe some of that is true for Big Star. They made some incredibly great music. And at the time, it was completely unappreciated and lost in whatever shuffle was. I can't remember what year the first record came out. Was it like 73
I think
ish?
so. That sounds right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Memory going.
well, but I mean, I definitely understand what you're saying. Just the fact that it seems like this record is sort of and this band has been bubbling under for a while. You know, when the PR folks reach out to us about talking with you, you know, they have a poker face with so many of their clients where they're just like, we have this Lions and Ghost. Wendy, was just like, oh my God, I loved this band when I was in high school. They meant so much to me. And just that enthusiasm. And I remember having those own bands in my own high school years where you're just like, these folks can do no wrong.
Right.
This is what I want to be when I grow up. And
Right.
so I definitely see that in that Big Star comparison of like listening to that record going, man, if I could just get those Alex Chilton, Chris Bell harmonies,
Yeah,
everything would be right with the world.
that's right.
And you guys were coming of age and doing all this at a, like you mentioned, a really fascinating time in music, especially music in LA. I noticed on your website, I believe it was, maybe Instagram, you had a picture of a show at, I think it was the Roxy,
Mm,
where it was you guys and Guns N' Roses
that's
was
right.
opening.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Now, having heard Appetite and having heard your record, these two don't seem like this is the chocolate and peanut butter
yeah.
metaphor time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What the hell was that backstage like?
Oh, I actually don't think that I can say that on your podcast. That is one of the most interesting backstage times for sure. But yeah, you know,
All right, let's put it this way. What does the crowd for that show look like?
well, if you can remember, I don't know how old you are, but you know, if you think back of, I liken it to, there was a time period in American music where it didn't matter what the genre was, it all got played on the same radio station. So
Hmm.
you could easily hear a folk song, a country song, a disco song, a new wave song, a slightly punk song, a hard rock song, all in the same couple of hours on radio in America. And that happened throughout the 70s, largely the 80s. And then I felt like it started spreading apart. In LA in the early to late-ish 80s, there was a lot of different scenes happening. There was certainly the hair metal scene
Hmm.
with Poison and Rat and all that. It's funny, all these bands were all friendly and all friends. There was never any oddness to any of that. So I think everybody was trying to do their thing. Everybody was trying to write great songs. Everybody was trying to get a deal so they could make an album. And so there was a lot of camaraderie. You know, some of those shows were a little bizarre, you know, having Guns N' Roses at that time and us, except for that in that day, well, these guys all look like they're, you know, rejects from the Rolling Stones circa 67. So we kind of looked the same at some point. Musically, things were really different. And the shows, every show that I can remember was always well received with whatever the bands were. It was
Hmm.
always, it was just a good night of entertainment. And surely there's you know, a large chunk of people there to see a certain band and the crowds sort of rotate a bit, but that was a memorable show. I mean, I think if I remember correctly, that was the night that Guns N' Roses got signed to Geffen.
Wow.
So that was a like a, okay, we all have a chance. That's what it felt like at that moment. And we were signed not that long after that. So there was a bit of a feeding frenzy in LA where, you know, they were signing pop bands, rock bands. We sort of evolved from some sort of gothy thing that became much more pop and then slightly Americana, but that's a different conversation. But yeah, it was a thriving scene and there was a lot of support amongst all the musicians.
And when you finally get to make this record, was this your first real studio time, your first album
It,
work?
for me personally and for the band, it was the biggest chunk and most professional project we'd all done. We had done a lot of home demos, a lot of recordings in the rehearsal studio. We did have a great experience recording with this guy, Dennis Mackay, who's done a million great records, and a bulk of those were all in the sort of mid to later 70s. So
Hmm.
I think for one of the labels, we ended up doing a set of demos with him in the studio and actually taking some time, albeit a couple days. But prior to this album, we didn't have any serious studio experience.
Did you guys feel like the blinders were off or the restrictors were off and you could do anything? Because I mean, there's strings on this record. These all these it sort of seems like to the uninformed listener going, it sounds like they're kind of getting to fulfill every impulse and every alleyway they want to try to go down and see how it sounds.
Nobody ever said no. I don't know. I don't know if that was good or bad, but
Right.
I do feel for that first record, it was pretty good in that we had explored a lot of different things. And that is a great snapshot of where we were at that time. So, we were trying to write the best songs we could write and fulfill like all the production wishes we had in our heads. And one of those was working with Tony Visconti, working with Peter Walsh, and it all really melded together. There was a lot of synchronicity. Unbeknownst to us, when we finally got the green light to work with Peter Walsh, next thing we know, we're booked into Tony Visconti's studio in the Good Earth in Soho. And we had tried to contact him about maybe doing string arrangements. So we get in there and we're in the studio every day and Tony's around all the time. And at some point he came in listening, and then his manager walked in the next afternoon and said, Tony wants to do the strings. We're like, we're doing strings now, people.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
that was an amazing experience. And truly no one ever said no. We had great A&R at the time, and we had really supportive people around us who wanted us to fulfill that sort of dream record that we were trying to make on the stage.
so it sounds like in that regard, that went pretty well. Was that a challenge? Was that a difficult thing? Or is it more of just like trying to figure out how to do what you want?
No, it felt easy and hard. It felt easy because I think we were all on the same page of how we wanted to be represented sonically. And but not having experience really played into that. There was a lot of experimentation. There was a lot of you remember being 24, there's a lot of figuring out who you are. Then there's who you are as a player, and then who you are to these other three people that you're essentially married to.
Yep.
It's like having three other wives. So, there are lots of difficult moments in the studio, but I feel like some of those helped. We were slightly competitive. It was a process, but the process, except for a few incidents, went really, really well. That record was an easy record to make as compared to our second.
Well, I was wondering about that, how the dynamic in the band changes. Did that first record, change things, restructure the kind of dynamic that you guys had as a live act?
I think so, yeah. I think that's pretty fair. And it's a lot easier to look at now, listening to, I have a lot of demos of everything prior to the second record, and there was a changing of personnel. We started chasing our own tail, sadly. I think we made a good, solid record. We had strong support in Southern California because we played constantly. We opened for everybody and their mother, especially the overseas acts. So we were building a great fan base. And then we put that record out and we saw still a lot of support from Southern California and most of the West, but not really anywhere else. And so then comes, doubt starts racing in, and it's like, oh, we have to rethink this. Instead of, I really do feel like we should have stuck to our guns, and I think it would have worked better for us in the long run, because the doubt just made us just do this constantly. And that's why musically it changed, that sonically it changed, that's why members started changing, and that's why eventually the whole thing just stopped.
It's interesting looking at your discography after Lions and Ghosts, because in many ways I feel like if listening to the record, I mean, you could have convinced me John Bryan produced this thing, and then you look ahead, and you're working with Amy Mann and John Bryan and all these folks who, I mean, sonically, it sounds so much the same. Where it's like you guys were on maybe different coasts. I guess John Bryan had probably moved to LA at that point and was kind of doing that same thing.
Yeah, I think John came out late '80s if I remember right, because they were working with. It's so incestuous, out here. Like they were working with Tony Berg for a Till Tuesday record, and at that point, Till Tuesday had evolved into John Bryan and Buddy Judge, and Michael
Mm-hmm.
Lockwood was still there. But obviously, our second record ended up being produced by Tony Berg. So I never met Amy or John through those circles, but I have a feeling that if I looked at John's record collection and I looked at Amy's collection and my collection and a lot of my friends, I think we have a lot of similar albums in our collection, and probably influences all to sort of head that direction, whatever direction that is. But it is similar. I agree with you. There is some odd thing. I was just so happy to end up working with Amy.
What was that collaboration like? I mean, you played on so many of her records.
I mean, it's interesting. It was an amazing time always. I consider her one of my best friends. She was a great teacher, a great friend, and she was so easy about things. When, in the studio, it was always sort of anything goes. Let's try it. What have we got to lose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Except for hours and hours and hours of studio time. But it just was always evolving. We spent a lot of time on the road together. We spent a lot of time doing TV shows and promo tours, a lot of time in the studio. And eventually there was this progression where I ended up producing her and working with her on Lost in Space. And really, she was so willing. Unlike, I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of artists, and some people have a definite idea. It has to be that way. And I understand that. And Amy was so game to just, let's go. Where are we going to go with this? And she was really willing, and she let everyone really contribute to her sonic palette. So that it was, and still is, an amazing relationship. I just, I don't know if you know, my label Sparkle Plenty is going to release an album by Bird Streets, and I don't know if
I did not know that. No.
So that's all coming, and coming soon. I had done a song with the singer Bird Streets, John Broder, called Unkind, and so I had Amy play bass on it, and then I had Buddy Judge sing on it. I had Patrick Warren, who spent years working with Amy as well, do the string arrangements for it. And we just finished a second song that's not going to be on his album. Amy plays bass on that. So we're still doing stuff together. It's really fun to have her come to the studio and play, because she's an incredible musician.
And it seems, again, if, like you said, comparing it to a relationship with being in a band and then having somebody like that, you can have this years and decades long conversation musically, and both, I'm assuming, grow a little bit, especially if you're, like you said, on Lost in Space, producing for her, just getting to sort of see what that relationship is like, that back and forth between the two of you.
Yeah, we have some big chunks of time where we didn't, but it's interesting that 8-9 years can go by, and a phone call later, you're in the studio together. You're talking about the same things that you always talk about, which is relationships, either your own or someone else's, or you're talking about great new music or whatever. It feels, she came over to the studio I guess a couple months ago. We sat down, started drinking coffee, started talking, and eventually we're like, oh shit, we got to get working now. So we started working on the track, and it's still as if you're 32 years old or whatever. You're still in that same mode, and that's a really interesting and cool thing. Just to bounce back to the Lines and Ghosts thing. That's what it was like writing the new song with Rick Parker that we're releasing a couple weeks.
So, yeah. Well, and about that, I mean, was that conversation No, I mean, it makes perfect sense. And I was going to sort of bring us around to that where we were going. But I mean, it seems, what was that kind of like, sort of in some form, getting the band back together?
That was incredibly bizarre. Um, I think I'd seen Rick a couple times. I think he came to a birthday party I had 10 years ago or something, but we hadn't worked together since I think right after Lions and Ghosts, he and I got together in a rehearsal studio for a day and just played some ideas, and nothing ever became of it. Um, but oddly, what happened was before the pandemic happened, um, I'd gotten a call to do a session from a local LA artist, and he said, "Can you play guitar on these two songs or whatever?" And he sent me some demos, and I said, "Yeah, I'd love that. That'd be great." And then right before I was going to go in the studio with him, he said, "We're going to the studio, blah blah blah." Well, it turns out it's Rick Parker's studio, and that was in Hollywood. And so I grabbed some stuff. I went over there and I walked in the room. It was as if no time had gone by at all. We sat down, we started chatting, we were recording, and we had a really incredibly great time together. And, when you're in a band, I talked about it being like being married to three other people in that case. Well, we didn't have the greatest breakup, so it was a little strange at first. And we just started talking about it, and it was so easy to just like amend a couple things that I don't even know bothered either one of us anymore anyway. But it was nice to, like, for me, I got to acknowledge to him what I thought his contribution was and how huge it was. And it wouldn't have been the same thing without it. So that felt really good. So he and I stayed in touch. After that session, I came back over there and we started writing together. And this is that single. We wrote it together, and then we produced it, and then Rick mixed it. I was super pleased with the results, and I think we're going to continue to do that.
What was the impetus to kind of resurrect the Lions and Ghost moniker? Because you could have just put it out as your two names, and those who know would know. But
Yeah,
you're adding a weight to it by putting that name on
right.
it.
It's funny because we just started writing a song, and I would say, you were talking about earlier, like the guitar player that made that record, is he still the same guitar player now,
Right.
basically? And I don't think so, but oddly, sitting next to Rick, I suddenly became that guitar player again. And he started, humming and singing. And then he started working with some lyrical imagery. And so when it came time to do all the guitar bits, I did them all at my studio and I sent them to him. And he put it all together, and he ended up doing a new vocal and sending it back to me. And he sent it back to me, and Rick is a master at words, but sometimes says very few. And so when he sent the track back to me, he goes, "Strange, it sounds like Lions and Ghosts." And I listened to it and I went, "It just sounds just like something we would have done, 30 years ago." So we talked about it a bit, and it seemed like it was a part of that catalog. So that's why I started, I sort of got the ball rolling, and I wanted to get this album re-released and find extra tracks. And also my manager, Jeff Keller, is a Lions and Ghosts fan, and that's how I met him years ago. And it doesn't hurt having somebody like Wendy on your shoulder who also supports and loves the music you used to do. So it just all kind of felt right, and it feels like it's part of that.
It must be nice, and it feel like sort of, I mean, you said righting all wrongs or previous wrongs, and sort of closing that circle and getting back into that kind of comfortable pair of shoes of like, okay, we can do this. It's got to be nice to work with one of those people that you really early started collaborating with.
It was really therapeutic. I always think music is, and it's funny, even outside of listening, music is therapeutic. And also, I don't know if it's righting all wrongs, because there wasn't really any wrongs. We were growing and we were young men and we were experimenting with different kinds of music and different ideas. But it was nice after years to be able to look at somebody and tell them, hey, this was amazing. And this at the time, I didn't really see what it was. And it just felt good to like clear all that weight, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there's probably still some more out there that I could clear, but in the case of meeting up with him and having that early journey together, because at that time, you didn't have the luxury of a full production bedroom studio. You didn't have the connection to record companies or anything. It was truly a lot of work to get signed. And because there was no TuneCore, there was no whatever it was to release your own stuff at the time. So it was quite a journey and a lot of stress on a bunch of young guys. So sometimes stress, you understand what that does to people. And it was really nice to see him and to make music without anything, nothing on it. It was just purely like, I have this idea, and you really get back to the thing you had when you first met.
Velvet Kiss, Lick of the Lime, the debut album from Lions and Ghosts, has just been reissued digitally, including new bonus tracks, available right now wherever you get your music. And if that wasn't enough, there is a brand new single available digitally as well. Gurl, I Love You.
You can check us out on all the various socials. Be sure to visit our website at rockandrollgradschool.com, and don't forget to leave us a review.
Today's show is produced by myself and Heidi Hedquist. Our reluctant producers are John Sauvé and Sandy Stone. Our willing producers are Rachel Allen and Randy Jeanette. Our intern is Zach Jackson. This one's for Philippe. Thank you, good night, and may all your favorite bands stay together.